I'm different, remember? I'm the fella that's going to split the world into two camps.
Warner Brothers didn't invent the gangster film, but in the 1930s, they perfected it. While other studios were making musicals and romantic comedies, Warner Brothers ripped stories from newspaper headlines and turned real-life criminals into cinema legends. They did it faster, cheaper, and grittier than anyone else in Hollywood. At the center of this empire were the actors who became synonymous with the genre, tough-talking men who could make audiences root for ruthless killers one moment and fear them the next. These weren't just stars. They were Warner Brothers' crime syndicate, contract players who defined what it meant to be a screen gangster.
After a while, I became so imbued with the ruthlessness of these characters that I got to believing that I myself was really tough.
James Cagney. James Cagney wasn't supposed to be the star of The Public Enemy. When Warner Brothers cast the 1931 film, Cagney was given the supporting role of Matt Doyle, while Edward Woods played the lead, Tom Powers. But director William Wellman watched them in rehearsals and realized Cagney had something Woods didn't: raw, captivating charisma. Wellman switched their roles, and Cagney became an overnight sensation. As Tom Powers, a Chicago bootlegger who rises from street punk to powerful gangster before his inevitable violent end, Cagney brought a new kind of energy to the screen. He was small, wiry, explosive. He moved like a boxer, talked like a machine gun, and had a smile that could turn vicious in an instant. The most famous scene in The Public Enemy is the grapefruit scene, where Cagney, annoyed by his girlfriend at breakfast, shoves half a grapefruit into Mae Clarke's face. It was shocking for audiences in 1931 and for the rest of his life. When Cagney dined at restaurants, other patrons would send grapefruits to his table. The Public Enemy made Cagney a star, but it also trapped him. Warner Brothers immediately cast him in gangster film after gangster film. Between 1931 and 1934, Cagney made 17 movies, nearly all of them for Warner Brothers, and most of them crime pictures. He played thugs, conmen, bootleggers, and killers. The studio worked him constantly, churning out films as fast as they could shoot them. Cagney hated being typecast and fought Warner Brothers constantly over his contract. He walked out twice, each time demanding more money and better roles. The studio would suspend him, he would threaten to quit acting altogether, and eventually they would reach a compromise. In 1935, Cagney sued Warner for breach of contract and briefly signed with an independent company. But he always came back. The money was good, and the roles, while repetitive, showcased what he did best. In 1938, Cagney earned his first Academy Award nomination for Angels with Dirty Faces, playing Rocky Sullivan, a gangster who grew up with a priest, played by Pat O'Brien. The film asked whether Rocky would die a coward to discourage neighborhood kids from idolizing criminals, or die tough to maintain his reputation. It was one of Cagney's most complex gangster performances, showing the man behind the machine gun. His greatest gangster role came in 1949 with White Heat, where he played Cody Jarrett, a psychopathic criminal with a mother complex. The film's climax, with Cagney shouting, "Made it, Ma, top of the world," before being engulfed in an explosion, became one of cinema's most iconic moments. Cagney made over 60 films during his career, winning one Academy Award for playing George M. Cohan in Yankee Doodle Dandy. But it was his gangster roles that defined him, the tough Irish kid from New York who became the face of Warner Brothers crime films. He died in 1986 at age 86, decades removed from his days as Hollywood's most dangerous leading man. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson became the first gangster of filmland with Little Caesar in 1930. Born Emanuel Goldenberg in Romania, Robinson immigrated to America as a child and became a respected stage actor in New York. He had done some film work but was nearly 40 years old when Warner Brothers offered him a small part in Little Caesar. Robinson talked his way into the lead role of Rico Bandello, stealing it from Clark Gable, whose ears Jack Warner thought were too big. As Rico, a small-time hood who claws his way to the top of the Chicago underworld before his inevitable fall, Robinson created the template for every screen gangster that followed. He was vain, ambitious, ruthless, and ultimately pathetic. The film's final line, "Mother of Mercy, is this the end of Rico?" became one of cinema's most quoted moments. Little Caesar was a massive hit and made Robinson a star overnight. Warner Brothers immediately teamed him with their other rising gangster star, James Cagney, for Smart Money in 1931. The film was shot concurrently with The Public Enemy and marked the only time Robinson and Cagney worked together. For the rest of the decade, Robinson fought against being typecast as Little Caesar. He took roles in comedies, dramas, and social problem films, trying to show his range. He succeeded more than most gangster stars, proving he was a serious actor, capable of playing complex characters. But Warner Brothers kept pulling him back to crime films. In Brother Orchid in 1940, he played a comic variant of Little Caesar, a gangster who retires to a monastery. Robinson's career at Warner Brothers lasted through the 1940s, though his gangster roles became less frequent as he aged. He struggled with the House Un-American Activities Committee investigations in the 1950s, when his liberal politics made him a target. He was never formally accused of being a communist, but the suspicion damaged his career. Robinson made over 100 films before his death in 1973, earning a Special Academy Award for his contribution to cinema, but he never won a competitive Oscar, and he never entirely escaped the shadow of Rico Bandello, the character who made him famous and haunted him for the rest of his life. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart spent most of the 1930s playing dead gangsters. He appeared in The Petrified Forest in 1936, recreating his Broadway role as Duke Manty, a killer on the run. But it wasn't a starring role, and when the film ended, Bogart went back to playing supporting characters who usually died before the final reel. He was a contract player at Warner Brothers, working constantly but never quite breaking through to stardom. Bogart appeared in crime films alongside Cagney, Robinson, and George Raft, always as the heavy, the guy who gets killed. In Angels with Dirty Faces, he played James Frazier, one of the gangsters who dies. In The Roaring Twenties in 1939, he played George Halley, Cagney's rival bootlegger. He got more screen time, but Cagney was still the star. Bogart was frustrated. He was in his 40s, playing the same types of roles he'd been playing for years, and his career was going nowhere. The breakthrough came in 1941 when Warner Brothers needed someone to play Roy Earl in High Sierra. George Raft turned down the role, thinking it was too similar to his previous work. Bogart took it and made Earl sympathetic, a career criminal trying to pull one last job and go straight. Audiences loved him. Later that year, Warner Brothers cast Bogart as Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon. Again, Raft had turned it down. Again, Bogart made the most of it, creating one of cinema's most iconic private detectives. Suddenly, after years of supporting roles, Bogart was a star. In 1942, he played Rick Blaine in Casablanca, cementing his status as one of Hollywood's greatest leading men. His gangster days were behind him, though he would occasionally return to crime films like The Big Sleep and Key Largo. Bogart had finally escaped the trap that caught so many Warner Brothers contract players, the endless cycle of gangster pictures that made them famous but locked them into type. He died in 1957 from esophageal cancer at age 57, having transformed himself from a journeyman heavy into a legend. George Raft. George Raft grew up in Hell's Kitchen in New York, running with real gangsters before becoming an actor. He knew how criminals talked, how they moved, how they thought. When he arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s, that authenticity made him valuable to Warner Brothers and other studios looking to cash in on the gangster craze. Raft's breakthrough came in Scarface in 1932, where he played Rinaldo, a coin-flipping gunman working for Tony Camonte. The coin flip became Raft's trademark, a nervous habit that suggested violence barely contained. Raft appeared in numerous crime films through the 30s and 40s, playing gangsters, nightclub owners, and tough guys. But his refusal to take certain roles hurt his career. He turned down High Sierra because he didn't want to die at the end. Humphrey Bogart took the role and became a star. Raft turned down The Maltese Falcon because he didn't want to work with an inexperienced director like John Huston. Bogart took that role too. Raft's association with real criminals also damaged his reputation. He was friendly with mobsters like Bugsy Siegel and allegedly had connections to organized crime. In the 1960s, British authorities refused to let him into the country, and the Bahamian government barred him from a casino where he was supposed to serve as host, citing his mob connections. Raft made over 100 films, but never achieved the lasting fame of Cagney, Robinson, or Bogart. He died broke in 1980, his money gone to bad investments and gambling debts, a real-life cautionary tale of the gangster who couldn't escape the life. John Garfield. John Garfield was the last great Warner Brothers gangster star to emerge before the genre's golden age ended. Born Julius Garfinkel in New York, Garfield was a product of the Group Theater, the legendary acting company that helped develop method acting in America. When he signed with Warner Brothers in 1938, Garfield brought intensity and working-class authenticity to roles that might have been one-dimensional in lesser hands. His breakthrough came in Four Daughters in 1938, playing a cynical musician. Warner Brothers quickly cast him in crime films, recognizing his natural toughness and his ability to play men trapped by circumstance. In They Made Me a Criminal in 1939, he played a boxer on the run for a murder he didn't commit. In The Postman Always Rings Twice in 1946, he played Frank Chambers, a drifter who murders his lover's husband. Garfield's characters were different from Cagney's cocky killers or Robinson's ambitious hoods. They were victims of the system, working-class guys driven to crime by poverty and lack of opportunity. There was a political edge to Garfield's work that made him suspect during the Red Scare of the late 40s and early 50s. Garfield had been involved with leftist political groups, and when the House Un-American Activities Committee called him to testify, he refused to name names. The refusal destroyed his career. He was blacklisted in Hollywood and couldn't find work. The stress contributed to his death from a heart attack in 1952 at age 39. Garfield made only 28 films in his 14-year career, but he left an indelible mark on the gangster genre, proving that screen criminals could be complex, sympathetic, and tragic. Paul Mooney. Paul Mooney was the most respected actor among Warner Brothers gangster stars. Born in Ukraine, Mooney was a Yiddish theater veteran who approached every role with meticulous preparation and seriousness. When Warner Brothers cast him in Scarface in 1932, Mooney studied real gangsters, particularly Al Capone, whose life loosely inspired the film. As Tony Camonte, Mooney created a character who was brutal, ambitious, and ultimately doomed by his own ambition and incestuous obsession with his sister. Scarface was one of the most violent films of the pre-code era, and censors battled producer Howard Hughes for nearly a year before the film could be released. Mooney made the violence feel real, not sensationalized. Unlike Cagney and Robinson, Mooney didn't want to be known as a gangster star. He fought for dramatic roles and period pieces that would showcase his range. He played Émile Zola, Louis Pasteur, and other historical figures, winning an Academy Award for the story of Louis Pasteur in 1936. Mooney was so committed to disappearing into his roles that audiences often didn't recognize him from film to film. He would spend hours in makeup, changing his appearance completely. His dedication earned him respect from critics and fellow actors, but it also made him difficult to market as a star. Audiences wanted to see the actor, not just the character. By the early 1940s, Mooney's career at Warner Brothers was winding down. He returned to the stage and made occasional films, but he never regained the prominence he'd had in the 30s. He died in 1967 at age 71, remembered as one of the finest actors of his generation, even if general audiences never embraced him the way they did Cagney or Bogart. Barton McLean. Barton McLean was the quintessential Warner Brothers heavy, the big tough guy who showed up in film after film to intimidate the hero or serve as muscle for the lead gangster. McClane appeared in over 100 films during his career, mostly for Warner Brothers, and in most of them he played cops, gangsters, or tough guys. He was in The Maltese Falcon as Detective Dundee, Sam Spade's antagonist. He was in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre as a crooked contractor. He appeared in countless crime films through the 30s and 40s, usually billed somewhere between 5th and 10th in the credits. McClane was reliable, professional, and effective. He understood his role in the Warner Brothers system. He wasn't going to be the star, but he was going to work constantly, and he did. Character actors like McClane were essential to Warner Brothers' ability to churn out so many films so quickly. They could be plugged into any production, play their part competently, and move on to the next picture. McClane later found success in television, appearing in westerns and crime shows. He died in 1969 at age 66, having spent 4 decades playing tough guys in over 200 film and television productions. Alan Jenkins. Alan Jenkins was Warner Brothers' comic relief, the wisecracking sidekick who showed up in gangster films to provide humor between the violence. He had a distinctive nasal voice and a hangdog expression that made him instantly recognizable. Jenkins appeared in over 180 films, many of them for Warner Brothers, almost always playing the same type of character, the dim but loyal henchman, the nervous accomplice, the street-smart cabbie. He was in The Maltese Falcon as the taxi driver. He was in Brother Orchid with Edward G. Robinson. He was in Dead End with Humphrey Bogart. He showed up so often in Warner Brothers crime films that his presence became a running joke. Like Barton McClane, Jenkins understood his place in the studio system. He was a working actor who appeared in whatever they needed him to appear in, said his lines, collected his paycheck, and went home. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was making a living. Jenkins worked steadily through the 1960s, transitioning to television as film work dried up. He died in 1974 at age 74, having spent nearly 50 years as one of Hollywood's most familiar faces, even if most people never knew his name.